Good morning. Discussing today is the naval battle of Vella Lavella. Small, insignificant perhaps island, but it was a significant battle in the stopping the Japanese in the South Pacific and pushing them back. Before we go too much further, let's orient ourselves in time. December 7th, 1941, of course, was Pearl Harbor. The Battle of the Coral Sea happened 5 months later, just 5 months later, and it is one of the most significant battles because it stopped the Japanese progress to the south, toward Australia. 1 month later, the Battle of Midway, way to the north. Taking the Solomon Island chain is what we're going to be discussing right now. The Guadalcanal campaign, it took 6 months of bitter fighting in Guadalcanal before we took it back from the Japanese. The Japanese had gotten Guadalcanal and all of the Solomon Islands chain by that time. So we took it back in the 7th of February of 1943. And that began the Solomon Islands campaign, and the campaign was to push the Japanese back to the northwest, back toward Rabaul, where they came from. The naval battle of Vella Lavella was midway through the Solomon Islands campaign. If you'll notice, the Solomon Islands campaign didn't end until the 21st of August, 1945. The reason for that is we chose not to take back the Japanese naval base at Rabaul. Those of you who might be might be fans of the Victory at Sea series, there's one very classic called Ring Around Rabaul, and it discusses that. We chose to isolate Rabaul rather than to take it. All right, so let's take a look at what we're talking about here. Of course, this is the Pacific. Hawaii, okay, Battle of the Coral Sea happened right here. This line that you see is the furthest on line for the Japanese. That's as far as they got. We stopped them at the Battle of the Coral Sea. The intention of the Japanese at the time was to invade Port Moresby in New Guinea. The Coral Sea, the Battle of the Coral Sea, it stopped them. We lost one aircraft carrier and sunk, and one aircraft carrier badly damaged, but we stopped them there. May 42 was the date of the Battle of Coral Sea. And you can see what they were doing, pushing down toward Australia. Right here is where Darwin, the capital of the North Territories you see how closely they got. Japanese never invaded Australia. However, they did shell the city of Darwin. That's how close they got, within shooting range. Now let's take a look at the Solomon Islands. The Solomon Islands, this is Guadalcanal. This is as far as the Japanese got by May, and we stopped them and started pushing them back at this point. Just some terms that you may be familiar with. This is called the slot. This is how the Japanese positioned their troops and their ammunition and food and everything else. So they would run the slot at night. Our job was to stop them. Down here is the Savo Sound, it was called back then. It's now more commonly known, or officially known, as Iron Bottom Sound. This is why it's called Iron Bottom Sound. Here's Guadalcanal. Here is Tulagi. Iron Bottom Sound because there are 32 Japanese ships on the bottom of that sound alone. Plus, there are 28 U.S. Navy, Australian Navy, and New Zealand Navy ships down there too. So there are 60 ships on the bottom. That's why it's called Iron Bottom Sound. All right, that's just it. All right, now, the Solomons campaign we talked about the job was to push the Japanese back up toward Rabaul. Rabaul is right here. Here's New Guinea. Here's Port Moresby down here where we stopped them. Coral Sea, the Battle of Coral Sea took place right here. We then were pushing them back, got as far as these little groups of islands here, and the Japanese were pushing further and further back. The island we're going to be talking about now is Vella Lavella, this little island right there. The Japanese determined that they were going to evacuate their forces from Vella Lavella. Vella Lavella was an island that was contested by the U.S. Army and the New Zealand Army. They pushed in very bitter fighting. They pushed the Japanese back to the northwest corner of Vella Lavella, and the Japanese came down from Rabaul with the intention of evacuating their forces from Vella Lavella. And our mission was here. Take 6 destroyers of the United States Navy, part of Task Force 31. The 2 task groups were 31.1 and .2. Selfridge, Chevalier, and O'Bannon were 31.1, 31.2, I'm sorry, and Ralph Talbot, Taylor, and Lavallette, 31.1. 6 total ships. 6 ships were directed to rendezvous and proceed to stop the Japanese evacuation force that was coming down from Rabaul. Let's take a look more closely at it. Here is Vella Lavella, and this is where the problem happens. This is the rendezvous point. This is where the Japanese were coming down. Problem was, there was not enough time to get the 6 ships, the 2 different groups together. 31.2 was operating in the Vella Gulf, right here, right next to Vella Lavella. They were close. It only took them to go up and hang a left, and they were on their way to the battle. However, 31.1 was much further to the south when they were ordered, and they were 30 minutes behind. But things were happening too fast. Things were happening too fast. Let's talk about some of the ships were here. This is 31.2. This is USS Chevalier, and O'Bannon are both Fletcher class. By the way, if you look at the top, the chrome frame here is a USS O'Bannon, the most highly decorated destroyer of World War II, USS O'Bannon. And the other is the Selfridge, which was a pre-war Porter-class destroyer. That was 31.2. 31.1 was 2 Fletchers again, the Lavallette and the Taylor, and a pre-war Bagley-class Ralph Talbot. Remember, 31.1 was out of the picture right now. They're way to the south. All right, why are we stopping?
Take a breath.
So far, you've seen, you're watching this thing as anyone would watch it in a, for example, a documentary. But you're all tin can sailors. Every one of you is a destroyer man. Every one of you in some way has been to general quarters over and over and over again. You know what you did, whether you're a gunner's mate or a bosun's mate or a quartermaster or a machinist mate in the engine room or a BT in the fire room. Every one of you, when the general quarters was sounded, you went to your general quarters station. I would like you now to just quietly remember what it was like to go to general quarters on a destroyer. We've all done it. We're all tin can sailors. We've all done it. All right. Got that in mind? I want you to place yourself as a member of the crew of the USS Chevalier. In whatever your general quarters station was, in your mind, you're now on the USS Chevalier as a member of the crew. Fletcher class DD 451. All right, what are the weather conditions that night? Now, it's nighttime. What are the weather conditions like? The commanding officer of the Chevalier, in his after-action report, the sea was calm, a bright moon with occasional overcast. Later, 4 hours later, Commander Peckham, who is the CO of the Selfridge, says it's now, it's a waning moon, The moon has set and is now very dark. This is what you see. If you're the helmsman on the bridge, if you're in an open gun mount, you're a torpedoman, this is what you see. Ships are all darkened. If this were during the day, this is what you would see. The ships are at 30 knots when this battle takes place. 30 knots. Think about that, destroyermen. 30 knots. 500 yards apart. Their interval is 500 yards. You're at 30 knots, 500 yards, and that's what you see. All right. What are we up against? The Yagumo class of the Japanese force that's coming down to evacuate Vella Lavella there are about 20 ships and boats and barges of various sizes, a whole gaggle of them coming down to evacuate the remaining Japanese forces from Vella Lavella. They are escorted by 6 Japanese destroyers. These are every bit the match for a Fletcher class destroyer. They are within feet of each other in length, within feet of each other in breadth. The Japanese were longer and thinner. Fletcher classes were shorter and chubbier, like some of us today. Yagumo class, 6 guns, 6 5-inch guns in 3 twin mounts, 2 torpedo stations with a total of 28 long lance torpedoes. Sorry, 24 long lance torpedoes. The infamous long lance torpedo. The Japanese are experts at night fighting. The Japanese are experts at gunnery. The Japanese are experts at torpedo engagements. One thing they do not have, and they never did have for the entire war, is a functional working radar. There is no radar. However, they are incredibly proficient at night fighting. Their optics are incredibly good, much better than ours. All right, so let's take this is a little bit of a busy slide. Where are we here? Vella Lavella is down here. Rabaul, where the Japanese are coming from, is up here. The Japanese forces are approximately 20 vessel evacuation force. They are heading for Vella Lavella. They're trying to scoop down here to complete their mission. They are escorted by 6, as I said, 6 Japanese frontline destroyers. 2 of them were up here with the group, and the other 4 were waiting for them down here. The 6 of them were there. They're being opposed by our 31.2, the Selfridge, Chevalier, and O'Bannon, coming from this direction around the top of Vella Lavella. And as you can see down here, the Talbot, the Taylor, and the Lavalette coming as hard as they can, but they're a half an hour out of the picture, coming up from the south. As they're coming in, they get a radar contact. The USS Chevalier, your ship gets radar contact at about 10 to 12 miles. 10 to 12 miles. They can see, they think there are 5 ships, there are actually 4 that they're looking at, these 4. At the time, the 2 Japanese destroyers coming down from the north and the 4 coming up from the south, they join up. And as you can see here, this column of 4 Japanese destroyers reverses its course, and they form up, and this is 1 mile apart. So you got 2 Japanese destroyers on the right flank, 4 on the left. The engagement begins here. At this time, and I'll kind of blow this up a little bit for you. The engagement begins when there are only 4,000 yards apart. Those of you who are gunners know that's almost point blank range for a 5-inch. It's very close. The shooting starts, the torpedoes start. Chevalier, Selfridge, and O'Bannon all make a hard right. The Japanese come down to make a hard left, and there are opposite courses just 4,000 yards apart. The entire three-section or three-ship U.S. force launches torpedoes on command, all at once. I don't know the exact number, but they just, the Chevalier launches 5 of their 10. Fletcher only had 10 torpedoes. The Chevalier launches 5 of them. Problem here with the Japanese, they made a tactical error. Their formation was incorrect. As you can see, only one of their ships fired torpedoes, the Longlands. It's because he was blocking all the other 3. The other 3, it could not. The line of the line of the torpedo launch would have hit the Yagumo. So Yagumo was the only ship who launched a torpedo. As they're turning, Yagumo lets loose his torpedoes and he turns away. The other 3 Japanese ships continue down and back up here. That's them down there. The problem is, poor old Chevalier, your ship, you're hit. This is what you look like as you're steaming along. You're 30 knots. 30 knots. You are at right full rudder at this time. The ship is maneuvering. Right full rudder, 30 knots. The Selfridge is 500 yards in front of you. O'Bannon is 500 yards behind you, and you're at 30 knots. This is the forward part of the ship. Mount 51, Mount 52. Magazines down here. Repair, forward repair. Repair 2, we call them now. Forward repair is here. Battle dressing stations here. A lot of people on the ship. This is what happens. Torpedo hits approximately here, and there's a sympathetic detonation of the entire magazine. All the magazines forward go up. The captain, in his report, he says there are 2 distinct, they were only a fraction of a second apart, but there was an explosion from the torpedo hit, followed immediately by the explosion of the magazines forward. And it was so violent that it severed the forward part of the ship. Blown back, and the captain later reported that it was gone back to frame 72. This is frame 60, so all the way back to 72. And this is what was lost. The entire forward section of the ship was lost. Ship is still at 30 knots. Still at 30 knots. So that ship went from a sleek Fletcher-class destroyer cutting through the waves at 30 knots to a bulldozer plowing through the waves at 30 knots. All the lights are out. Turns out that the forward fire room, the forward watertight bulkhead was ruptured because of the shock. The forward fire room is filling. 3 minutes after she is hit, by the way, the Selfridge keeps on going. 3 minutes after she's hit and she's coming to a grinding, out of control halt, the O'Bannon collides with her. The O'Bannon hits the Chevalier on the starboard side in the after engine room, opens up the entire after section of the ship, after engine room. So you can imagine what happens. Comes to a grinding, slow halt in total darkness. The O'Bannon, who just hit it, O'Bannon backs away off into the darkness. So here you are aboard your ship. The entire forward portion is gone. And what do? You're the captain. And you very quickly come to the decision that it's time to evacuate. Have to abandon ship. But where is your buddy O'Bannon? By the way, the Selfridge is long gone. O'Bannon is somewhere out off into the darkness. So he turns, the captain turns to the chief signalman, who is there on the bridge. Everyone's stunned, the bridge is destroyed, and said, take your blinker tube, but the chief can't move. So it ends up the job of a second-class signalman by the name of Lee Westfall. And signalman looking for his blinker tube. He cannot find his blinker tube. It's lost in the debris of the bridge. This looks like a gun. Of course, it's not. World War II, it was a directional signaling device. You pull the trigger and you're turning a light on and off and on. So that and you can see the signalman is actually using it here. So you can't find that, though. You can't find the blinker tube. So what do? Petty Officer Westfall turns to his flashlight in his back pocket. Now, take a brief. This is that flashlight. This is not a flashlight like he used. This is not a representative flashlight. It is the flashlight he used. All right. He kept it. Just as an aside here, the survivors of the Chevalier formed an association for many years, a very active association. And they are now gotten to the point where they had to they turned over their artifacts to Tin Can Sailors. We have them here in our museum. And as you can see, this is it lighting? Yeah. And I'll pass it around. Get a chance to operate this flashlight. Well, what's the significance of this? Well, the significance is the O'Bannon sees the light. O'Bannon sees the light and comes back alongside. O'Bannon, as you'll see in a picture here shortly, her bow is all twisted 90 degrees out. She can't maneuver. She tries to get alongside but can't. It's pitch black. The two ships are trying to maneuver. Men are in the water over the side, so it's tough. Lee Westfall and his striker with that flashlight are down on the main deck now talking to the O'Bannon, telling them where men are in the water. The O'Bannon, because she can't maneuver alongside because of her damage to her bow, O'Bannon puts they have two motor whaleboats on Fletcher. Put both of them in the water, and the motor whaleboat from the O'Bannon goes around picking up the Chevalier crew. But I didn't mention this, but Yagumo, after she turned away, she was finally hit by one of the torpedoes that had been launched by either the Chevalier, the Selfridge, or the O'Bannon. Don't know which one, but Yagumo was hit by the torpedo and sunk. So not only did O'Bannon's crew pick up and save 275 of your shipmates from the Chevalier, they also picked up 25 Japanese sailors surviving from the sunken Yagumo. By the way, the following day, after everything has settled down, US PT boats went out to the scene of the battle, and they picked up an additional 78 Japanese sailors out of the water. All right. Here I have just fiddled with this thing. What does that mean? Here is the Selfridge. As you know, Selfridge lost her bow just like the Chevalier. Selfridge was hit by 2 torpedoes, but the difference is Selfridge was hit by 2 torpedoes. The difference is that the magazines of the Selfridge did not detonate. So she lost her bow also. She lost it. It was gone, just like the Chevalier's was. However, the watertight bulkhead for the forward fire room and all that remained intact. This is what it looks like. This is the Selfridge from the starboard side, looking at her. She's in the backwater area now, waiting for repair. This is what she looks like bow on. This is the forward. This is Mount 52, I believe, on the Selfridge. Selfridge Selfridge actually had 8 5-inch guns, believe it or not, as opposed to 5 that Fletcher's had. But she had 4 twin 5-inch mounts. This is Mount 52. Here is the O'Bannon. Look at her bow. She creamed the wreckage of the Chevalier at 30 knots. And that's what her bow did, just bent it right over. And this is why she couldn't maneuver. She's pushing her own twisted bow. So what they did, they sent the Selfridge. Let me talk about O'Bannon for a second. They unbent her bow. This was a forward area with a couple repair ships that had been repairing ships. They unbent her bow, got her back in shape, and sent her right back into the fray. O'Bannon did not, and she was probably down for about 2 weeks. They fixed her bow and off she went again. That was the only damage O'Bannon had. Selfridge, however, they cut away all the wreckage. This is after they cut away, and they built a phony bow, a a temporary bow. And you can see it here on the Selfridge. This is the bridge. Everything is gone. Everything forward of that is gone. So they have a watertight bow, and it wasn't flat. It was kind of an angled bow. And they steamed, Selfridge steamed over 7,000 miles from the Solomon Islands all the way back to San Francisco, and you can imagine what speed she was making, 4 or 5 knots all the way. The repair people in the Solomons did such a good job of photographing the damage and engineering drawings of what was really wrong with the ship that by the time that they completed their 7,000-mile transit back to San Francisco to Mare Island Naval Shipyard, their new bow was sitting waiting for them in 3 pieces on the pier. It was all made, and all they did, they put her into dry dock, and they cut away the temporary bow, and they welded on the new bow. Believe it or not, they sent Selfridge right back to the Pacific. She continued to steam in the Pacific for about another year, and they finally said, well, Selfridge, you've probably done enough. And they sent Selfridge then through the canal to the Atlantic, and she completed the rest of the war as an escort in the Atlantic. This is what the results were. And we talked about material problems here. 54 men were killed on the Chevalier, 46 injured. And you can see almost the same on the Selfridge, 51 killed. And guess where they all were? They were all in the bow. The real cost of this. I'm going to read this to you. I know it's busy, so I'm going to read it to you. This is the final comment by the commanding officer, Captain Wilson, of the Chevalier, at the end of a 5-page detailed report, after-action report that he made to SINCPAC Fleet, reporting the loss of his ship. I would like to make the unqualified remark that I had the honor to command one of the finest officered and manned ships in the South Pacific. I have nothing but praise for the conduct of each and every individual attached to the ship. I would also like to recommend that the entire group, officers and crew, be ordered to commission a new destroyer. They have all expressed their desire to do so, and if this recommendation can be followed, I feel certain that the fleet will have an excellent fighting ship from the day she is commissioned. Signed, R.G. Wilson, Commander, Commanding Officer. All right, who is this? USS Chevalier. I thought it sank. USS Chevalier DD-805. Deering-class destroyer named in honor of DD-451. Was commissioned in 9 January 1945. She entered Tokyo Bay with Halsey's Task Force 38. Not known, however, if any of the survivors of the lost Chevalier were aboard her namesake to witness the surrender of Japan. So they did what the captain asked, create another ship, and not only, but call it the Chevalier. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, just shout them out. Okay.